The candles in the servants' hall at Merrowfield burned low on the last Tuesday of October, and the woman standing at the long deal table with a ring of keys in her hand had been dead for 10 years. She did not look dead. She looked tired. She wore gray wool, plain and correctly cut. The sleeves buttoned to the wrist, and her hair was pinned into a knot so severe it pulled faintly at her temples. She had given her name to the steward as Mrs. Hale, widow of Kentish origin, with a written character from a household in Deal that did not exist and could not be applied to, because the lady who had signed it had died in the spring and the house had been sold. The steward had read the paper twice, glanced at her hands, and hired her on the spot, because Merrowfield had gone through 4 housekeepers in 2 years, and the 5th was welcome whoever she was. The bell above the door rang once. The whole hall stilled. "His lordship is returned," said the steward, and the kitchen maids began to move very quickly and very quietly. And the woman who called herself Mrs. Hale set the keys down on the table because her hand had begun to shake, and she did not wish anyone to hear the iron rattle. She had counted on 3 weeks. The Viscount was to have remained in town until the middle of November. She had chosen this house precisely because of that arithmetic, because 3 weeks was time enough to learn the rooms and the tempers and the back stairs, time enough to place herself so far below his notice that when he came he would see only gray wool and a bent head, the way a man sees a chair he does not intend to sit in. Somewhere above her, a door closed, boots crossed a floor. To the household, she was already just the new woman, and the phrase had been said aloud that very morning by the cook, Mrs. Paddett, who had a broad red face and a habit of speaking her verdicts into the steam. "The new woman will do or she will not," Mrs. Paddett had said to the scullery girl, not troubling to lower her voice. "They generally do not." The woman in gray picked up the keys again. She had held heavier things. "You are going to want to know how a wife comes to be standing in her own husband's kitchen under another name. Stay with her. She will tell you nothing directly, and you will learn it anyway." Her name, 10 years ago, had been Cassandra, and she had been the Viscountess Merrowfield for 11 months. The 11 months had been the only good ones of her life, which was the difficulty. A woman can walk away from misery. Misery has a door in it. Cassandra had walked away from a house where a man had been kind to her every single day, and there had been no door, and she had made one, and she had been making the same one over and over ever since in her sleep. The drowning had been in the Solent, in a squall, in September. The boat had been small and hired, and she had been alone in it, because she had told her maid she wished to sketch the coast, and had gone down to the water at 4 in the morning with a folded letter in her pocket. The boat had been found overturned near Yarmouth. Her mantle had been found on the shingle. Her body had not been found, which surprised nobody, because the Solent gives up what it chooses and keeps the rest, and the coroner had recorded misadventure, and the parish had rung its bell, and a Viscount of 29 had put on black. He had never put it off. That was the part of the story that had followed her across 10 years in 3 counties, carried by servants and tradesmen, and the sort of women who read the papers aloud at breakfast. The Viscount Merrowfield wore black, for his wife. 10 years of it. He had not danced, he had not courted. Sadder, he had refused, so the tale went, a duke's daughter in her 2nd season with a sentence so short that the Duchess had gone home in the carriage without speaking. Cassandra had heard that story in a coaching inn in Sussex told by a stranger to another stranger, and she had gone out into the yard and stood in the rain until her face was the same temperature as the rest of her. There had been a reason. There had been a reason worth a body in the Solent. She had believed it then with the whole force of a woman of 22, who had been told a thing by a person she had no cause to doubt, and she had acted on it, and the acting had cost her a decade of scrubbing other women's floors. She had not permitted herself to reconsider the reason. To reconsider it would have been to look directly at the arithmetic of what she had done, and she had learned early that some sums must not be worked in public. Now she was 32, and her hands were raw at the knuckles from lie, and she was standing in his kitchen. The steward came down at 9:15. Mrs. Hale, His lordship will see the household in the Great Hall at 10. All of it. He does that on arrival. All of it, she repeated. Every soul under the roof. The steward, whose name was Bickerstaff and who had been at Merrowfield 40 years and had known her, had carried her trunk up the west stairs on her wedding day, was looking at her with mild professional impatience and no recognition whatsoever, because Bickerstaff's eyes had gone, and he had been too proud to say so, and the household had quietly arranged itself around the fact for 6 years. 10 o'clock. Do not be late, he notices. She had 48 minutes. She spent them doing what she had done for 10 years, which was work. She counted linen. She wrote the number in the book in a hand she had deliberately made square and ugly, nothing like the looping thing she had once used on invitations. She sent the scullery girl, whose name was Nan, and who was 13, and had a cough, to sit by the fire for a quarter of an hour, and say nothing about it to anybody. At 10 she stood at the end of the line in the great hall, 41 servants in order of precedence, and the housekeeper's place was near the front, and she took it, because to refuse would have drawn every eye in the hall. He came in from the west door. She had prepared for the face. She had spent 10 years preparing for the face. She had not prepared for the walk, and the walk arrived first, and it went through her like cold water through a cracked pipe, because he still walked as though the floor were an old argument he had won. Julian, Viscount Merrowfield, was 39. He was taller than she had allowed herself to remember. He was in black, not morning black, in the ostentatious sense. No crepe, no armband, nothing announced. Simply black. Black coat, black waistcoat, black in the stock at his throat where other men wore white, and the whiteness of the shirt beneath it made the rest of him look like a man standing in his own shadow. His hair had gone iron at the temples. His jaw had the set of a man who had been holding something in his teeth for a long time and had stopped noticing the ache. He went down the line. He said a name to each of them. He knew the names. Paget. My Lord Bickerstaff. My Lord. He stopped in front of her. The hall was very quiet. Cassandra looked at the third button of his waistcoat and thought, with a clarity that astonished her, that she had sewn a button very like it once, badly, and he had worn the coat for a season anyway. You are the new housekeeper, he said. Yes, my lord. Your name? Hale, my lord. Mrs. Hale. There was a pause of perhaps 2 seconds. It was not a long pause. Nobody else in the hall marked it. Cassandra marked it with the whole surface of her skin. Mrs. Hale, he said. The east passage windows have been painted shut. See to it. Yes, my lord. He moved on. He said the next name. He said all the names. He went out through the west door, and the line broke, and Mrs. Paget exhaled and said something about the fish, and Cassandra walked at a perfectly ordinary pace to the still room, and shut the door, and put both hands flat on the shelf, and stayed there, until the trembling had finished with her. He had not known her. She had been certain he would not, and she had been right. And being right was the worst thing that had happened to her in 10 years. What she did not consider, standing in the still room with her hands on the shelf, was why a man who had just come off the London road at 9 in the evening had walked into his own house and asked about the East Passage windows. The East Passage led to nothing. It led to a linen store, and a dead staircase, and a room that had been shut since the autumn of the drowning. The dismissive label found her again on Thursday in the housekeeper's room, which was small and cold, and had a window that looked at a wall. Lady Verena Thorne had driven over from Ashcombe with her aunt, and a footman and an air of ownership that had taken her 4 years to perfect. She was 26, and beautiful in the manner of a woman who has been told so at correct intervals since she was 9. She had inherited the campaign for Merrowfield from her mother, the way other families hand down plate. I shall want to see the housekeeper, she said in the hall, and she said it to Bickerstaff, and Bickerstaff fetched Cassandra. Lady Verena looked at her for 4 full seconds. You are new? Yes, my lady. Where were you before? Deal, my lady. A private household. Deal, Verena said the word, as one might set down a cup one has found unclean. She turned to her aunt, who was inspecting a bull, and did not lower her voice at all. "It is astonishing what one may hire. Now this one is the new woman, apparently. They come and they go. Merrifield eats them." Her aunt made a sound. "You may bring the tea to the yellow room," Verena said over her shoulder, already walking. "I do not care for the cook's biscuits. Do not send them up." Cassandra brought the tea to the yellow room. She set it down. She did not look at the wall above the mantel where a portrait had hung once of a young woman in white with her hand on the back of a chair, painted in the March of her marriage, and never finished properly because the sitter had laughed too much. The wall was bare. The hook was still in it. She was 3 steps from the door when Verena said, "Mrs. Hale, do you know why he keeps this room shut?" "No, my lady, nor do I. 10 years. Verena turned a spoon over in her fingers. "A man may grieve. It is proper. It becomes improper somewhere. And no one will tell him where." It was the first true thing Cassandra had heard anyone say about Julian in a decade, and it had come out of the mouth of the woman who intended to have him, and Cassandra carried the tray downstairs with her jaw aching from the effort of keeping her face arranged. She began to see him after that, not because she sought him, because Merrifield was a house of long sight lines and he was in it. She saw him at 7 in the morning at the terrace door, with a cup he had not drunk from, looking east. She saw him in the library at 11 at night. 1 candle, a ledger open that he was not reading, his hand at his breast pocket in a gesture so habitual it had worn the cloth pale. She saw him stop once, halfway down the long gallery, in front of nothing, for the length of a held breath, and then go on. She told herself she was cataloguing a stranger. Her body did not believe her. Her body knew where he was in a room, the way a compass knows north, and it did this without her permission, and she found herself standing at the foot of the back stairs on the 4th night, with her hand on the newel and no memory of having decided to stop there. He came out of the study and found her. "Mrs. Hale." "My lord, forgive me. I was going up. At midnight, the linen." "My lord." He looked at her. The candle was behind him, and she could not see his face properly, which was a mercy, and she could see his hands, which was not, because his right hand had closed on the door frame hard enough to whiten the knuckles, and then had opened again deliberately, the way a man opens a hand he has caught himself making into a fist. "Sit down," he said. "My lord, there is a chair. Sit down." A pause. "You have been on your feet since 5. I am quite well. Sit down, Mrs. Hale." She sat down. He did not sit. He stood in the doorway of his own study at midnight, and looked at the wall for perhaps 10 seconds, and then he said, in a voice that had gone level, in a way she remembered from a long time ago, "The East Passage windows. They are freed, my lord. Both of them. You did it yourself. It wanted a knife and a little patience. The men could not do it in 6 years." He said it flatly, not as a compliment, as an item entered in a ledger. Then he went back into the study and shut the door, and Cassandra sat in the chair for a full minute with her heart going in her throat like a bird in a chimney, and got up and went to bed, and did not sleep. Stay close to this next part. She was about to do the only thing she had ever done that could not be undone by hiding. The costly thing happened on a Sunday, and it happened in front of nobody, which was the point. Nan, the scullery girl with the cough, broke a jug. It was not a valuable jug. It was, however, the jug that Mrs. Paget had used for 11 years and had a temper about, and Mrs. Paget came out of the kitchen with her sleeves shoved up and a voice like a slammed gate, and behind her came the under-butler who wanted to see it, and behind him came 2 of the maids. Nan stood in the shards and did not cry, which was worse. "That is coming out of your quarter," Mrs. Paget said. "That and the last one. You are careless and you are sickly, and I have said so." "She did not break it," Cassandra said. The passage went quiet. "I beg your pardon, Mrs. Hale. I broke it." Cassandra stepped into the shards. "I set it on the edge of the board this morning when I was counting the shelf." She caught it going over. "She very nearly saved it." She looked at Mrs. Paget, and she made her voice ordinary, and ordinary was the hardest thing she had done that month. It comes out of my quarter. And Nan sits by the fire until that cough is gone, and if the work does not get done, I will do the work. It was a lie. Nan had broken the jug. Nan knew it. Nan looked up at her with her mouth open, and Cassandra did not look back, because there is a way of protecting a child that requires you to make the lie boring. And boring lies survive, Mrs. Pat had said something about people who had been in the house 4 days. The under-butler drifted off. The maids drifted off. It cost Cassandra 1 6, which was a great deal. And a week of Mrs. Paget's silence, which was more. She did not know that Julian had come in at the far end of the passage for a book he had left in the morning room. She did not know that he had stopped when the voices began. She did not know that he had stood in the dark of the passage for the whole of it, out of the candlelight, and that when it was over, he had gone back the way he came without the book. She learned it 4 days later, when the physician came from Havant to see the scullery maid on his lordship's order, and would not name who had sent for him, and would not take a coin. Cassandra stood in the yard and watched the physician's gig go out through the gate, and something moved in her chest that she had spent 10 years pinning down, and she pinned it down again. The midpoint of a life is often a Tuesday. It was the 2nd week of November, and it was raining, and the fires would not draw, and she went up to the long gallery to shut a window she had been told was open, and it was open, and he was standing at it. He did not turn. "Do you know?" he said, and stopped, and she understood that he did not know she was there, that he was speaking to the rain, and that she should leave, and she did not leave. "My lord," he turned. He had a thing in his hand. He did not put it away, which was the first time in 10 years that he had failed to put it away, and afterwards he could not have said why. It was a miniature. A small oval, the paint gone slightly dull at one edge, where a thumb had passed over it perhaps 20,000 times, in a chased silver case, with a hinge that had been mended once, badly, by a man who was not a jeweler, and had refused to give it to a man who was. "Shut the window," he said. She shut the window. She did not look at his hand. She looked at his hand. "My wife had a way of leaving the piano. At the middle of a phrase," he said to the rain. In past tense, in a voice with nothing in it. "She would stand up and go and do something else. I used to think she would come back and finish it. I have not had that instrument tuned since September of the year 11. Cassandra's hands were behind her back, and she had taken hold of one wrist with the other, and was pressing hard enough to bruise. "I was in Portsmouth," he said, "the morning it happened. I was in Portsmouth because I had gone to look into a matter, a thing my mother had told me, and I did not tell my wife I was going, because I did not wish to give the thing air by speaking it aloud." He put his thumb over the little oval, once, and the gesture was so old and so worn that it did not look like grief. It looked like breathing. I was 3 hours away. If I had been in the house, she would not have gone down to the water. That is, the whole of it. There is no more to it than that. Everyone would like there to be more to it than that. He put the miniature into his breast pocket. "You need not repeat that," he said. "No, my lord, Mrs. Hale." He looked at her properly for the first time, and the light from the window was on his face, gray and even, and there was nothing in it she could read. "Why did you take the fault for the jug?" The rain went on for a while. "Because she is 13, my lord," Cassandra said, "and because it was 1 6, and not a hanging matter. And someone ought to be able to break a jug in this world without it costing them their place." He nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed something rather than told him something. "Go on," he said, and she went. She got as far as the gallery door before she understood what he had said. "A matter? A thing my mother had told me." She stopped with her hand on the frame, and the whole architecture of 10 years shifted 1 inch to the left and did not fall. The Dowager Viscountess Merrowfield arrived on the 22nd of November with 3 trunks, a companion and Lady Verena in the second carriage. She was 71. She was small and upright, and her hands were beautiful. and she carried a fan she did not use for air. She had run Marrowfield for the 18 years of her own marriage, and the 12 years of her widowhood, and the 11 months of her son's marriage, and she had stopped running it on the day of the funeral because there had been nothing left to run it against. She came into the hall and looked at the household, and her eyes stopped on Cassandra for 1/2 second and moved on. And Cassandra stood in her gray wool with her keys and her plain hair and her 32 years and her lie-burned hands, and was not recognized. 10 years is a wall. Grief had built half of it. Work had built the rest. "You will find," the dowager said to her at 11 the next morning, in the yellow room, with the bare hook above the mantel, "that this house has habits. My son has permitted them to become superstitions. That room is to be opened. That instrument is to be tuned. Lady Verena is to be given the west suite, which faces the garden, and no one is to make a face about it. Yes, my lady. You are the new woman." The dowager said it pleasantly. She turned her fan over once. The last 4 were the new woman also. "Do you know why they left?" "No, my lady. Because a house in mourning is a house without a future, and servants can smell it." She looked at the bare hook. "I have buried a husband and a daughter-in-law, and I am not sentimental, and I will tell you the truth of it, Mrs. Hale, because you will hear a worse version in the kitchen. My son married a girl with no money and no family, and a great deal of charm, and she drowned, and he has spent 10 years being a monument. Monuments do not have sons. Ashcombe has 10,000 a year, and Lady Verena is fond of him, and there is an end to it." The fan turned again. "It is not cruelty. It is arithmetic." "Yes, my lady." The room, Mrs. Hale. Today, Cassandra opened the room that afternoon. It was on the East Passage. It had been shut since September of the year 1811, and the air in it was 10 years old. The shutters came back, and the light came in gray and thick with dust, and there was a piano against the far wall with its lid down, and a chair pushed back from it at an angle, as if someone had stood up in a hurry, and a sheet of music open on the stand, with a pencil line through one bar. Nobody had moved the chair. In 10 years, nobody had moved the chair. Cassandra stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth, and made no sound at all because a housekeeper does not make sounds. And then she went in, and she began to clean the room, and she cleaned it for 4 hours. And she did not touch the chair. She understood, somewhere in the 3rd hour, what she had done. She had believed a woman. That was all. She had been 22 and married 11 months and afraid of her own happiness, in the way that people who have never had any are afraid of it. And the Dowager Viscountess had come into her sitting room on a September morning with a folded letter, and had been kind, and had explained to her that Julian's affairs were in a condition that a wife of no fortune could not mend, that there was an understanding of long standing with a family in the north, that a marriage of 11 months could be quietly set aside if the parties were willing, and that Julian, who was too honorable to say any of this himself, was being ruined by his own decency at the rate of some hundreds a year. And here is the letter, my dear, in his own hand. You know his hand. She had known his hand. She had read 4 sentences of it, and had not read the rest, because 4 sentences had been enough to put a boat on the Solent, and she had walked out of that sitting room, and had never in 10 years let herself finish the thought that began, "But I did not read the rest." She stood in the cold music room with a cloth in her hand and finished it. The Dowager had had a letter. The Dowager had shown it to her at the exact hour when Julian was 3 hours away in Portsmouth, looking into a matter his mother had told him. The Dowager had not expected a boat. The Dowager had expected a girl with no money and no family to pack a bag and go quietly to Kent, and had got instead a mantle on the shingle at Yarmouth, and a son in black for a decade, and had lived with it, and had come here in November with 3 trunks and a candidate. Cassandra put the cloth down on the piano lid. She could go tonight, on foot, to Havant, and the coach at 6, and never again. She had done it before. She was, in fact, extremely good at it. She looked at the chair pushed back from the piano and understood that she had been running from a thing that had never existed, and that the running was the only real event in her life, and that she had done 10 years of penance for a crime committed against her. She did not go to Havant. The peak was set for the 4th of December, the ball at Marrowfield for the first time in 10 years, and it was the Dowager who set it. She announced it at dinner. She had the invitations out before her son had said yes, which was a thing she had done all her life, and which had always worked. Cassandra ran it. There was nobody else to run it. She hired 11 extra people from the village and worked out the seating and the candles and the ice, and she found that her hands still knew the shape of it, that her ugly square handwriting could still order a supper for 140. And once at 2 in the morning over the lists, she laughed out loud, once, at nothing, and stopped herself with her fist against her mouth. Verena found her on the stairs on the 3rd of December. Mrs. Hale. Verena was in the doorway of the yellow room with a swatch of silk in her hand. She had been kind to Cassandra twice that fortnight and had not known she was doing it, which was somehow worse. The new woman does the work of 6. My aunt says so. She says it as though it were a fault, my lady. Verena looked at the swatch. She was 26 and had been the correct choice since she was 9, and she was standing in a house that had been mourning another woman for a decade. He will not look at me, you know that. Everyone knows that. I am to stand in a room next Tuesday and be looked at, and he will look at the terrace door. There was nothing to say to that which a housekeeper could say. You may go, Verena said. The dark moment arrived on the 4th of December at 10:15 in the evening in the ballroom, in front of 140 people. It arrived because Cassandra made a mistake, and the mistake was that she carried the tray herself. The footman meant to do it had cut his hand on the ice. There was no one else. She took the tray of glasses and went along the edge of the ballroom with her head down, in her gray wool, invisible. 41 servants and 140 guests, and the orchestra playing and the candles doubled in the terrace glass. And she came past the Dowager, Viscountess Saller, who was seated in state near the fire, with her fan, at a measured height, and Lady Verena arranged at her hand. And the Dowager Viscountess looked up. It was nothing. It was a glance of the kind a woman gives a tray. It went to the glasses, and then to the hand holding the glasses. And the hand had a small white scar across the base of the thumb from a garden gate at Marrowfield in the June of 1811. And the Dowager had been standing beside her when it happened, and had wrapped it in her own handkerchief. The fan stopped. Cassandra saw it stop. She kept walking. She set the tray on the table and turned, and the Dowager Viscountess was standing. You, the word went perhaps 6 feet, the orchestra covered it. Nobody. Turned. Come here, the Dowager said. Cassandra came. The old woman's face had gone the color of paper, and her hand on the fan was shaking. And for one moment, one only, there was something in her eyes that was not calculation, and it was horror. And then the calculation came back over it like a shudder, and she said very quietly, very pleasantly, You will leave this house tonight. My lady, tonight within the hour. You will not speak to him. The fan came up an inch. You have no proof of anything, and I have a great deal. And if you make a sound in this room, I will have you taken up for fraud and theft of a place, under a false character, and you will be tried at Winchester, and you will hang, and either way he will spend the rest of his life being told that his wife was alive for 10 years and did not come home. Her voice did not rise once. Think about that last part. It is the only part that will actually hurt him. Go and get your bag. And Cassandra, 32 years old, standing in the ballroom of the house where she had been a bride, felt the whole 10 years come down on her at once. And it was not the threat of Winchester that did it. It was the last part, because the last part was true. She turned to go. Mother. End quote. He was 6 feet away, and he had been there for some while, and Cassandra did not know how long. And neither did the Dowager, and the orchestra chose that moment to finish. There is a particular quality of silence that arrives in a room of 140 people when the music stops and somebody is standing wrong. It spread outward from them across the floor, like frost on a window. The nearest faces turned, then the next. Somebody's glass touched a table too loudly. Lady Verena rose to her feet with her hand at her throat. Julian did not look at his mother. He looked at Cassandra, and he had been looking at her. And she understood, in that moment with total and shattering clarity, that he had been looking at her since the 14th of October, since the Great Hall, since the third button of his waistcoat, and that a man who has held the thing in his teeth for 10 years does not open his mouth merely because he sees a ghost. He waits. He watches. He asks about the East Passage windows. He sends for a physician from Havant and will not give his name. He takes a miniature out of his pocket in a gallery in the rain and does not put it away because he wants to see what her face does. He had known. He had known for 6 weeks. He had been waiting for her to come to him, and she had not come. And now his mother was standing between them with a fan. He crossed the floor in 3 strides. He did not touch her. He stopped an arm's length away, and the whole room could see his face, and there was nothing left in it of the man in black at the terrace door. It had all gone. What was underneath was very young and very simple, and had been sitting under that stone for 10 years waiting for exactly this. Cassandra, he said, her given name, in his voice, in that room, out loud. It went through the crowd like a stone through ice. Somebody said the name back. Somebody else said it. A woman near the terrace doors sat down abruptly on a chair that was not there, and was caught by her husband. The Dowager Viscountess said, "Julian, this woman is an impostor, and I will not have," and stopped, because he had turned his head 1 degree in her direction. And she had known that face since it was 4 years old. He turned back. He did not make a speech. He took the miniature out of his breast pocket, and he held it up, not to Cassandra, to the room, to the 140 of them, so that the nearest could see the small, dull oval and the mended hinge. "My wife is not dead," he said. "She is standing here. She has been in this house 6 weeks. That was all of it. That was the whole thing. 11 words and a name." Then he put the miniature into Cassandra's hand and closed her fingers over it, and held them closed, and the room made a sound like a long breath let out. Bickerstaff, 40 years at Marrowfield, half blind, came forward out of the servants at the wall and stopped in front of her and looked at her from perhaps 18 inches away for a long moment. "My lady," he said, and his voice cracked on it, and he stepped back and stood there, with his eyes streaming and his hands at his sides in perfect form. The Dowager Viscountess sat down. She sat down all at once, the way old women do when the thing that has been holding them up is taken away. And her fan went onto the floor, and she did not pick it up, and she said, "It was a copy, the letter." She said it to nobody. She said it 3 times, and the 3rd time it came apart in the middle. It was a copy of an old letter, from before he ever met her, and I only meant her to go to Kent. Lady Verena Thorne stood very straight in her ice-blue silk in the middle of the floor with 140 people around her, and looked at the Dowager for a long moment, and then at Julian, and then at the woman in grey wool with the miniature in her fist. And Verena, who had been the correct choice since she was 9, understood in 1 clean second exactly what she had spent 4 years standing next to. She bent down and picked up the Dowager's fan and put it into the old woman's lap. Then she said in a voice that carried, "My aunt and I will take the Dowager Viscountess to Ashcombe tonight. She is unwell." She looked around the room, at all of them with her chin up. "There is nothing further to see here, Mr. Vike. Bickerstaff, our carriage." It was the kindest thing anyone did that night, and it cost her everything she had come for. And she did it in front of witnesses so that it could not be undone. The solicitor came from Winchester on the 9th of December, a small, dry man named Prentice, who had drawn the marriage settlement in 1810 and remembered it. He sat in the library for 4 hours, with the parish register and the coroner's paper and the false character from Deal and Cassandra herself. And at the end of it, He took off his spectacles and rubbed his eyes, and said that a finding of misadventure could be set aside on evidence of the person's continued existence. That the marriage had never been dissolved because there had been nothing to dissolve. That she had been the Viscountess Merrowfield without interruption for 11 years and 11 months, and that the business of the character reference was a triviality he would deal with himself and did not wish to discuss further. He wrote it out. Julian signed it. Cassandra signed it, and her hand did the looping thing without being asked. And Prentice looked at the signature and then at her and said, "Yes, that is the hand," and put it in his case. The Dowager Viscountess did not return to Merrowfield. She took a house at Lyme with her companion, and she wrote that spring one letter, which was 4 lines long and contained no defense of any kind, and Cassandra read it twice and put it in the fire, and told Julian only that it had come. She had earned better than a lifetime of being right about that woman. Christmas came in with snow, which it had not done at Merrowfield in 9 years. The music room was open. It had been open since the 5th of December and would not be shut again. The shutters were back and the fire was lit, and Nan, whose cough was gone, had been promoted to the still room and had a way of standing in the doorway of any room Cassandra was in until she was noticed. The piano had been tuned on the 18th by a man from Portsmouth, who took 2 days over it and would not be hurried. Cassandra sat down at it on Christmas night in a gown of soft green that had been made for her in 3 weeks by a woman in Havant, who had cried, twice for no reason. She would give. Julian stood at the window with his back to the glass. He was not in black. He had gone up on the morning of the 5th and had come down in a coat of dark blue that had been at the back of a press for 10 years and did not fit him any longer across the shoulders, and he had worn it anyway, every day, until the tailor came. Outside, the snow came down on the terrace, and on the box hedge, and on the gate, at the end of the garden where a girl of 22 had caught her hand on a latch in June. Cassandra put her hands on the keys. She played the phrase she had left in the middle on a September morning in 1811, and she played it through to the end of the bar, and then to the end of the line. And then she stopped because her eyes had gone and she could not see the music. Julian crossed the room. He did not say anything. He put his hand flat on the lid of the piano beside her, not touching her, an arm's length of nothing between them, the way he had stood in the ballroom. "I do not know how to begin," she said. "You have begun." His voice had gone low. "You began it 11 years ago, and you stopped for a while." She turned on the bench and looked up at him, and he was close enough that she could see the gray at his temples and the place at his jaw where the muscle had lived for a decade, and it was not moving now, and the not moving of it undid her more than anything that had happened in the ballroom. "I want," she said, and stopped, because she had not said the word aloud in 10 years, and it had gone strange in her mouth. "I made myself into a person who could not want anything, and I did it very well, and it did not work for a single hour." He closed his eyes. That was all. He closed his eyes and stood there and breathed once, and his hand on the piano lid turned over so that the palm was up, and it was shaking. She put her hand in it. They stayed like that for a while, and there was a moment, exactly one, where the air changed, and both of them knew what came next, and both of them stopped at the same time, without moving apart, because 10 years is a long time, and neither of them was going to spend it in a single evening. He bent his head, he kissed her once at the corner of her mouth, and it was slow and full of promise, and it was nothing at all compared to what it cost him to stop. "Play the rest," he said against her hair. The miniature sat open on the piano lid where she had put it that afternoon, the small dull oval and the mended hinge, a girl of 22, with her hand on the back of a chair, painted in a march a long time ago, laughing at the painter. Cassandra played the rest. Outside, the snow went on falling and the house held its breath, and in the doorway a 13-year-old girl stood where she had not been invited and was not sent away. "Thank you for staying to the end of this one. If she has stayed with you, sit a moment with the last of the fire before you go."